Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you, whoever is placed in whichever part of the world they're watching it right now. I'm Ananya, and I'm your host on behalf of GBB Venture today. And we have a very engaging panel and a very apt panel for the current times today, which is basically to discuss affordable housing development in the post COVID era. We have some eminent speakers on board today, starting with Devina Wood, who will be moderating this session for us. She is the principal of Affordable Housing Institute. Then we have Sam Odia, who is the chief executive of Millard Fuller Foundation. Now, what Millard Fuller Foundation is most famous for is their cheapest African home ever. Till date. And then we have Mustafa Neche. He's from TAF Global Africa. He is the CEO of the company and he's one of the prominent developers in the west of Africa. We also were to have Sadia Aminu, who's the managing director and CEO of Urban Shelter. Anyone from around Nigeria will know Urban Shelter. But unfortunately, she's caught up in a medical emergency. We wish her the best, but we will be having a colleague of hers join in shortly. So we'll hand over the mic to Devina, and Devina, please start off.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Anu. Hello to everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. As Anu said, it's a great panel with a lot of very prominent representatives from the development side of housing and with a strong Nigeria presence. So I think that should provide for some interesting conversation. So the topic of the panel is affordable housing in a post-COVID era. I thought it would be interesting to not only, the majority of the conversation will be about what happens after coronavirus is under control, but it's also interesting to think about the more immediate effects. So I'd love it if each of you could tell me a little bit your opinion on what impact COVID-19 has had on your industry so far. What are you seeing happening straight away? For example, have some of your sites, if you're in the midst of developing housing, been stalled? Do you find that your government counterparts are too distracted and aren't as engaged currently? How are you? What are the immediate effects on your personal business endeavors? Sam, do you want to start?
Okay, fine. What impact has COVID-19 had on the industry so far? Well, I'd say there's been an increased focus on the need for housing at the bottom of the pyramid. Some of the key preventive measures that are in place at the moment essentially are social distancing and the washing of hands. And when you look at the informal sector in Africa generally, you'll find that those seem to be so unreasonable to implement in informal areas where buildings are built so haphazardly and where you'd be lucky to even have running water. So there is, I think, a focus on the fact that, look, we before another pandemic sort of breaks out on the African continent, we need to begin to look at the low income areas. There is some attention, I think, being paid throughout the society, government as well as the informal sectors. Just looking at where most poorer people live and trying to see if there's something that can be done about having them live in better planned environments. I would say that that's perhaps the largest impact so far. In terms of people's behaviors, certainly at the sort of level that we're dealing with, because we're into low income housing and we're working mainly in informal areas and settlements, we find that people really haven't really changed their habits very much. So we're all supposed to stay at home, but who can stay at home in a room that's shared with 5 or 6 different people, where you have perhaps even more people living in the same space, where everywhere is crowded and the environment is simply not healthy. So most people have tended to just ignore some of these calls for social distancing. I think the whole idea of washing your hands constantly is a joke. as far as most people are concerned. So in terms of behavioral attitudes, nothing much has really changed at this level of society.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I was just saying I appreciate your focus on the base of the pyramid, because as we all know, the reality is vastly different in different socioeconomic classes. Mustafa, what have you seen so far?
Well, thank you. Whilst I have projects in Nigeria, I'm Gambian and I'm based in Gambia, and I'm stuck in Gambia for now. Actually, what COVID-19 has done is getting everybody to focus on health. We've just realized that, look, for this pandemic, we need to survive first before anything. But in Gambia, we haven't seen much difference. Whilst, in the formal sector and government, yes, has been focusing on, on health, people are going around in their business as usual. Especially on construction sites. So construction sites, at that level, it's very difficult to even make people to believe that this virus exists. Yes, it's everywhere, but one needs to realize that these people, are at the very bottom of the ladder, and they are on a daily or hourly survival. And most of these workers here, are people who come from other countries, and some of them, they live on site. So to be quite honest, we haven't seen much difference. Pre-COVID and now. What it will happen later, we'll discuss about it. But life at that level hasn't changed much. I haven't seen any changes.
Okay, thank you. Interesting that both you and Sam are seeing the same thing. I believe that Mukhtar, have you joined us?
Yes, I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, welcome. Your video is not on though.
Okay.
There you are. Hi. So thanks for joining us. So last minute, especially. What's been your experience so far? How have you seen your business impacted by COVID-19?
Well, I think the most difficult period was definitely during the lockdown, because no one could function. Both companies and individuals. We have the entire economy was locked down. So that was experientially by far the most difficult. That had a heavy impact in terms of our revenue, our sales, which is to be expected. But it's just the scale of the drop at that particular point in time was quite unprecedented. But I will say that from around the month of May, we definitely saw some activity in terms of the appetite for customers to, re-engage as far as, purchasing houses. So this has been the experience thus far, and something we're definitely monitoring closely. But absolutely, the month of March and April were you had a significant reduction in property sales, and this is across our entire portfolio. So it wasn't isolated to, let's say, the high end or the mid or the low. This was across the entire portfolio, and you can include, commercial developments in that discussion as well. And then by May, you saw a gradual increase, and then June, we would consider it a good performance based on the circumstances. So we are hoping that the trend continues to tick upwards. So this has been the experience so far.
That's interesting. And were your construction sites stalled?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, the federal the FCDA, that is the development, the Capital Development Authority here in Abuja, the capital. It's put some guidelines which really would make it physically impossible in terms of having full-scale operations. So there was that, and this happened during the COVID, and we're still in it. These restrictions have been just only slightly, relaxed. So that definitely had an impact in terms of how much you could do. For instance, in any of our sites, based on these new parameters, you can't have, no matter the scale of the site, you can't have more than, I think it's about 35 persons or so. So you can imagine if you're developing, let's say, a project of 100, 200, 300 units, you're faced with this very real restriction that's definitely going to impact the pace of your construction. And of course, as our colleagues will know, when the pace of construction is impacted, you can expect a commensurate slowdown in terms of deposits. And this has been interesting because even though pace has slowed down, in our case, we saw an uptick in deposits despite these measures. So that's why, we're quite hopeful that we continue to see an upward trend.
Interesting. I guess that makes sense because Nigeria has been, as a government, one of the most responsive and I'd say proactive within the continent. Mustafa, have you seen a negative impact on revenue? Have sales gone down for you too?
Let me come from two ends. One is in Nigeria, where our project is still ongoing in Port Harcourt. We've seen actually an upward trend in offtake, but I guess there's a reason for it. When COVID came in, the Naira value went down. I guess Sam and Muhtar will correct me if I'm wrong. That Naira today is trading at about 400 and something, 420, 130 to 450 from 360.
Right.
So obviously, quite a number of people that had Naira in their hands are now disposing it of. And I guess the best place to put it, or one of the places, is to buy property. So in Port Harcourt, we do both service land and completed units. And we have seen quite a number of people buying service land. In Gambia, we rely quite a lot from the people from the diaspora. They finance not only for themselves, but for their family members. So we haven't seen any difference, but I guess it will happen, post-COVID, because quite a number of our buyers, I guess, might lose their jobs, as we know that unemployment in the West is going up. But so far, we haven't seen much of a downtrend, from our buyers, in the Gambia.
Okay, and so that's really interesting that you're both seeing, for an unrelated reason to COVID, not much impact on offtake. What are you projecting for the next, let's say, short term for Q4 as well as for 2021? How is your company preparing itself in terms of your sales projections?
That's for who? Is that question for me or for Sam?
Do you want to go ahead, Mustafa, and then
look,
go around?
I think, Davina. We are in an era where we don't know what's going to happen the next day or two.
Right.
That's what COVID has brought. And first, I keep seeing, the peak in Africa being moved. At first, we were told in the Gambia that we will peak around end of March. Then they said, no, it's about middle of June. And now, yesterday, I was listening to the news and they say it will peak by end of July. Africa will peak, and we haven't seen the worst yet. So I think quite a number of us in business and in general are worried about our survival, about our health. So in terms of planning, for me, it's just business as usual. watching our expenditure, controlling costs. And it's very difficult to make any projections because simple things like movement in Nigeria from one state to the other, it's not possible. I have my project manager who's stuck in Abuja, for about 3 months now. My surveyor, who is Nigerian and works in the Gambia, is stuck with his family in Lagos. Actually, he comes from Port Harcourt, but he's stuck in Lagos for the past 4 months. So things are a bit out of control now. And for us, we're just making the best out of the situation. Wherever we are, we just do our business as usual until we know what next is going to happen with COVID.
Okay, Sam, how has the Fuller Foundation been managing it so far, the Fuller Center?
Right. Well, interestingly enough, beyond the immediate lockdown of workplaces and obviously construction sites, we're observing that there's a slow return to building sites that were already in operation. We have actually begun a new project right in the midst of the pandemic. There's talk by the government to invest a substantial amount of money into building construction to help revamp the economy and generate jobs. A recent plan prepared by the Economic Sustainability Committee has announced the injection of more than 2.3 trillion naira, $6 billion as a stimulus package into the economy. And a lot of that money is going to be going into construction. So very small compared to the amounts that are being put in by the US, for instance, 2.2 trillion, and the UK, 150 billion. But still something that we can look forward to. So, we've got work going on at the moment, and we expect to have a lot more work in the next few weeks. In terms of money coming in and revenue, the way we work is our model is slightly different in that, generally speaking, we have a bulk off-taker in the family home funds who generally off-take in bulk and then retail to the end user. So it's a bit of a social housing scheme, really, where we are dealing with a few direct purchasers, but the bulk of the purchase goes through the government.
Have any of your bulk off-take agreements been put on hold, or is everything moving forward as plans?
Well, no, things were slow before the pandemic, so they continue to be a little slow, but we do hope that they'll begin to move out. There's talk. We were with one of the deputy governors just yesterday, and there's talk of beginning to taking up some more bulk purchases from one of the existing estates that we have. So there is more and more talk, I think, going on or increase. There's a prospect of increased sales in the near future.
That's great. Mukhtar, how about at your company? How do you have a set of projections in place that you're working with, or are you taking it every day as it comes?
Well, it's a combination of both. So once the event hit, that is the COVID, and we saw that this would have a precipitous effect on development as a whole. The first thing we did was to just revise our, budget actually as an organization, and focus specifically on what projects we intend to do, during a period where we know the demand is going to reduce significantly. So we did that, and we sort of focus on projects that we believe even in this period will kind of flourish, even if it's not the rate that they typically do. So our medium sort of scale housing, some products lower than that. So we focused our energies on a lot of these types of developments, as well as some other niche developments. Obviously, some of our commercial developments we have put on hold. But this is the first thing we did. We looked at what were we doing prior to COVID. How sensible is it to do those projects. In many instances, we found that it wasn't quite sensible. Many of the assumptions we had prior to COVID will just have to change. So we changed our assumptions based on what we saw the economic effects of COVID was happening. So the result of that was focusing on a smaller but more precise, I would say, focused pool, of projects. And so far so good. So you have that as the sort of overriding principle, and then we do monitor it day to day. We have frequent sessions where we're actually in our management discussions. We have to look at what is happening in terms of COVID-19 as a line item of discussion in meetings that we have. So you have an overarching, approach, and then in terms of the granular day to day, we look at what is happening with COVID. What are the numbers like? How are we going to tweak operations based on the realities that we're getting? So that's what we did. In terms of projections, I think on the whole, I would say despite the reduction, the drop in demand, we always, if you're in development, you have to be bullish long term. That's how you have to be. You have to be bullish long term. That however difficult the trough is, over time, people would start to re-engage. The need for housing is an ever-present one. And over time, the thing will get better. So that's the view that we adopted in terms of our projection. So we took in the hit, we put a numerical value to it, if you want to call it that. So we priced it in as far as revising budgets, revising capital allocations, and so on. The long-term view is one where we think that things would, even if it's slowly, things would improve over time. That's been our approach.
Interesting. And perhaps I missed it, but can you say a little bit more about what type of projects you've deemed to be more sensible? Is it about the target market or the product or the location?
Well, it's a combination, but price point is important. So if you had a situation prior to COVID where certain products, are at a certain price point, and you had a particular reaction from the market to that price point. Now that you have a drop in, and you can say a drop in income as well as a result of the pandemic, price point becomes very important. So we looked at what price point, the products, residential obviously, and the price point that we're offering those. We have some projects that are within the range of, for instance, a 3-bedroom dwelling, an apartment, not an apartment in the sense that you have in the US, 20 floors in that sense, but apartment in our scenario here, 4 floors thereabouts. So you can see them kind of even like townhouses. And where a 3-bedroom in these types of projects goes for around 13 to 14 million. It's around $30,000 dollars. So focusing on that price point, focusing on price point that's above that. So this is the types of things that we're doing. I would like to add also that there's a point that was made by Mr. Mustafa, which is that this doesn't mean that there isn't capacity to invest in real estate in Nigeria, because we have other products that are priced much higher than this, and we've seen some significant investment in that portfolio as well. So it's a combination.
Okay, that's optimistic. That's great. I'd like to talk a little bit now about what permanent changes you're anticipating in the industry, so the future. Once COVID is hopefully in the rear view mirror. Are you anticipating any changes when it comes to, for example, housing typologies, changes to build type, or design, such as the introduction of what we refer to as health secure features? Or are you anticipating any changes to the build tech? Sam, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think that changes will occur, from time to time. I mean, generally speaking, I think there's going to be a faster movement for developers towards the lower end mass market. This has already begun, even before COVID-19. As many economies in Africa have a lot less free money, I think, floating around at the top. So rendering many homes unoccupied at the top of the ladder. But there remains, I think, the problem of an underdeveloped mortgage sector, which is poised to meet the demand in an effective and efficient way. So in the sector in which we try to work, which is the bottom 40%, conditions are so dire, and I think the need's so great. The opportunity for housing microfinance, for instance, for the housing microfinance sector to explode continues to grow. And investment should be, I think, headed in that area right now. There's a lot of talk about the $10,000 house for us, particularly promoted by our UK partners, Real. If this is so, then housing types will, I think, quickly move in the same direction, smaller incremental units. When you consider that 78% of the Nigerian population earns less than $100 a month, we need to be looking at mortgages of about $10 to $30, very, very small amounts for lower and middle income households. So micro mortgages and housing microfinance, I think, will soon be the order of the day. The lowest cost house produced by a private developer, which we produced, is affordable to only about 15% of the urban population in Abuja. So even though it's the lowest cost house in the entire continent, only 15% of the urban population can afford it. So this is where the opportunity lies. And if I were government, or if I were advising government, I think I would create a lot of incentives for developers to rush into this space, because this is where the coming action is. This is where the market is. From a health point of view, I think at our level, needs are so basic that the house itself, when compared to the informal settlements that most of our clients are coming from, is in itself a health feature. So, just having the house is the health feature. So that's our point of view.
Yeah. Mustafa, what's your take?
Well, my take is that I want to address two brackets. What I call the social housing, and then the other bracket is affordable housing. Social mainly is being done together with government, and I want to cite an example of Senegal. Senegal recently, as recent about 2 years ago, has announced an initiative to provide 100,000 units. And I think this is the future of Africa. I mean, if you want to really make housing affordable to the majority of Africans, majority of the urban population, government must intervene big time. And intervening meaning that certain things must be the responsibility of government, that is land being made available, and quite a number of incentives. So the future would be that we need to be looking at housing at that level being manufactured and not being built on a brick by brick basis. Whilst I am a strong advocate that we need to stay on brick and mortar, but what I would love to see probably, or what would happen at that point, is that mass production of blocks will be on sites rather than the conventional way of making blocks. In any of our sites that you go to now, I mean, even where it is machine made, I mean, it is made in very small quantities. So as the economics would know, is that we need to increase the supply, in big quantities in order to lower the price and make construction more efficient. So I think for the future of Africa, that's where the future is, and it should be through a public-private partnership where the public will work on their strength, and their strength is the provision of some of the basic components of housing, which is land, as I said, incentives, in taxes being lowered, and so on. And then on the demand side, government also needs to step in with the Bretton Woods Institute to make sure that funding is available. Because in Africa generally, the reason why we find it so difficult in providing affordable housing is the cost of finance. So with the future, I know that probably the World Bank under the IFC, they've been looking at housing mortgage. This would be the future. So it's a combination of two or three, where us as developers, we are at the supply end. We will probably change our style of construction and do things, in numbers massively, whilst our other partners, that is government and the financiers, will also come in and make a difference in this market.
Okay. I guess I just have one follow-on question to you, Mustafa, before we hand the mic to Mukhtar. I completely agree. I mean, I think the key to unlocking the market is certainly greater government attention, especially to provide incentives to go down market. But let's assume that the economic impact of this current pandemic has yet to really be felt locally by governments. Let's assume the situation is quite dire in a year. How likely do you think it is, or feasible it is, that governments will actually be able to provide these fiscal incentives if they're so fiscally constrained due to broader economic conditions? Do you think that will push them even more towards that because they have to focus? Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's very likely, but basic things like land allocation, which is quite. I don't know with Sam and Mukhtar, but for me, land cost on any development is over 20 to 25%, or even more. And in most cases, what I see in Africa now is that communities, are taking ownership of land. In the Gambia before, government could allocate you a land for certain type of development, like housing, affordable or social housing. But these days, if you are to buy land in the open market, then obviously it just shoots the price. So what government could do is make sure that they bring in that part in it, and that will be, considerable savings. Yes, on fiscal policies, to answer your questions, I think they'll be under a lot of pressure. But in life in general, Davina, I mean, every challenge comes with its opportunities. We saw, in the world, that oil price is around 2011 or so, which is just about 9 years or and 7 years ago. Oil price were at about 110. Then it dropped. I mean, I have an elderly guy who tells me that life is like a yo-yo, and more so in Africa, it's very difficult to make certain predictions. So we might have some economic boost for one reason or the other, that something happens, and then we'll pick it up from there. Government might be liquid, good governance might play, where they should be bringing some good fiscal policies towards housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Mukhtar, do you want to answer the original question about what you think the future might look like? Any permanent changes?
Well, I think there's a point that was mentioned that the true economic effects of this we will continue to feel for quite some time, and whether it's reached its zenith at this point, we don't know. I would like to think that being locked down for a good month or 6 weeks that it was, where you had zero activity, that in terms of a ubiquitous economic event, at least I'm hoping it doesn't get worse than that. But truly, we're going to see the effects of it for quite some time. And we like to always get individual incomes, because houses aren't these esoteric things. It's a financial obligation. So incomes are very important to people's ability to afford a house, especially when talking about participate in the conventional mortgage regime. And I know Mr. Sam has definitely articulated, he considered, I think, micro mortgages, and I think there is a lot of merit to that. But the immediate effect, and I would say mid-term effect, would be a drop in individual and household income as a result of COVID-19. If the Nigerian economy is expected to contract at around 3.4%, we know that incomes are going to be lowered as a result of this. What we don't know is what will next year be like? What will the year after that be like? So incomes will be affected. And also means people's ability to purchase a home that will definitely be affected. For example, there was a study that was done by the World Bank, or rather, I think it was commissioned by the World Bank and done by the AHIS, which found that 75% of the housing stock in all of Africa is actually self-built. That's a very telling statistic, right? And what this means is 3 out of 4 people in Africa, and this is with the exception of the Maghreb nations, Morocco, Tunisia, the North African states, 3 out of 4 people cannot participate in the conventional mortgage regime as it's currently structured. And therein perhaps lies the opportunity of the micro mortgages that I think Mr. Sam is talking about. So when you have drop in income, I'm afraid you might have a rise in that statistic, which means fewer people would be actually be able to afford houses over the next year or two as a result of this. So what can be done? I think there's 2 things really. There's a long term, which I will get to briefly, and then short term. A lot of the short term improvements that need to be made are what's being discussed. So there needs to be, there's legislation happening, and that is already having an impact. I remember several years ago, we often talked about this concept of a lack of financial ecosystem. If you look at Nigeria's mortgage system today, I think the financial intermediaries needed to provide mortgages are actually in place, at least by and large. Okay, I mean, we have the Federal Mortgage Bank, and these folks are working tirelessly, I can tell you. I know myself and our colleagues here definitely have interacted with them. You have the Family Homes Funds. You have the NMRC. Mm-hmm. All of these are put in place to provide mortgages. And some progress has been made. Okay, if you look at the ratio of mortgage to GDP, I think 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was around 0.5%. It's probably around 2% now. So short term is, let's put more of these intermediaries in a place where they can provide these mortgages. So they need to have capital, they need to have liquidity as much as possible. So this is all, again, on the short term. And why I call it short term is, imagine a kind of locomotive, a financial locomotive that needs to be well oiled to do what it needs to do. So all of this needs to happen. But long term, I think we have to focus on individual and household incomes, period. There's no way to avoid this issue in the long term. Mm-hmm. Accessing a mortgage is a financial burden. And if people are cost overburdened prior to COVID, they're going to be even more cost overburdened after COVID, unfortunately. So this is a serious thing that we have to focus on, improving individual incomes over time. And this, of course, is a much bigger economic problem that will have to be addressed with a series of different steps for a long period. So this is my take in terms of bird's eye view of the 2 aspects, the long term and short term. And then in terms of company wide, there are things that we are doing. I know that my colleagues are doing a lot as well to bring down the cost of a house as much as possible. So when we talk about being able to offer houses to the market, these houses have paved roads, provision for water, provision for electricity, gated community, at all around the price of as low as $30,000 to even $100,000. It's quite, at least we consider it remarkable, because dealing with market forces to be able to achieve that. So on our front, this is what we're doing, lowering the cost of house so that ultimately the price can reduce as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your focus on both the demand side of the equation, talking about how housing finance will be impacted, and supply, and how those two need to come closer together. Mustafa or Sam, do either of you have anything you want to add to what Mukhtar said, specifically about housing finance market and how it might be impacted, or how it should hopefully be supported? Should we move on? There's some questions coming in from people who've dialed in that I thought might be interesting to take a look at. And to all the participants, there's a very easy little Q&A function, little icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen where you can type in your question. We've had a couple questions from people about the actual construction. So Frederick Cooper wants to know, has it been difficult to get building materials, especially those that are imported?
Shall I come in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, no. It's not been difficult because, correct me if I'm wrong, again, for those who are in development, quite a number of building materials, affordable building materials, come from China. And China, I don't think, has been disrupted with supplies. And so in the Gambia, we haven't seen any shortage. And one of the things that the government did was to block off the borders, the frontiers, because the basic commodities like cement and rice and so on gets re-exported to other countries. So one of the policies they put in place when COVID came in the country. So we haven't seen, because we are surrounded by Senegal, what they have been able to do was to block the movement of persons, but not goods. So we have been seeing supplies of goods coming from Senegal. So we haven't seen much difference, in the supply of material.
In our case, at the Millet Fuller Foundation, 96% of our materials are actually locally produced. So this has never been an issue.
That's wonderful. But Mustafa, so you haven't seen any impact on your ability to obtain. What about the pricing?
The pricing also, no. I mean, not much has happened. Actually, because I don't know in other countries, but here there's a state of emergency. So some of the basic materials, I mean, the prices have been fixed. So it is illegal to even raise the price of cement. So under the state of emergency, the basic commodities, again, like rice and sugar, cement, were fixed. So we haven't seen, and we haven't also seen a surge in demand. The demand hasn't risen that much. Because most of the time in Africa, anytime that there is, a good demand, whenever the demand rises, then people will obviously, raise their prices. But we haven't seen any of the price hiking.
Okay, Mukhtar, has your ability to obtain construction inputs or the pricing been impacted?
Well, it has. It for certain projects more than others. So the lower the price of the house is in the range of projects that we do, the less imported materials we use. This helps in getting significant cost reductions. So, for instance, we employ bricks in our developments frequently, and one of the most ubiquitous things you'll see in an urban shelter development is the fence that surrounds the estate. So these are materials that we produce. And not only that, we have various types of bricks which we use, for instance, in the floor slab. that results in a reduction of between 40 to 50% concrete that you pour on a floor slab. So these are all major reductions as far as price point for the lower priced houses. So those aren't so affected so much. But when you look at some of the houses that are higher, let's say above 50 million in naira, which would be around 100 and maybe $10,000. So north of that, definitely importation been adversely impacted. As you know, for some time, ports were obviously closed and we couldn't have anything come in. So that affected the price of materials for projects that we're already midway into, that are north of that price point. So that had an effect. Of course, we cushioned it, and this is not something that we passed on to our customers, for instance. We're quite proud of. But it had an effect in terms of the rise in costs on those types of developments.
Okay, thank you. There's a question coming from Ken in Kenya. Oh no, I'm not sure where Ken is. I take that back. Anyway, Ken, I think he's sort of getting at a question that I asked earlier, and I'm not sure if there is an answer, but what he's asking is, how will COVID-19 impact the way we define the living space in social housing specifically? I think what he's talking about, what I'm going to add to this question is, for example, do you think that build design will change and in social housing so as to have more preventative measures against overcrowding? Will this be an ongoing concern, or is that simply impossible given how tight the margins are already when you're looking at a price per square meter and trying to bring down the price point to make it more accessible to low-income households? Sam, do you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, I think that's going to be very challenging. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, the provision of the house stuff at our level, at the level at which we are operating, is the health insurance itself. So it's I think more for people like Mukhtar and Mustafa. Yes, I mean, I would like to imagine that they're probably going to want to begin to sort of scale down or perhaps design smaller units. But I think our units already are extremely small. We sort of build in at minimum sizes as it is. And I don't see much room for reductions in that sense. As far as the introduction of health features is concerned also, because of the affordability of the houses, I think there's also very little that we can do in that aspect, unless we come, you know, I mean, we are researching to bring down house costs. So there's a basic $3,000 unit house that we're trying to come up, a 1 million naira basic incremental house that we'd love to bring to the market for people right at the bottom. But other than that, I think generally speaking, for the work that we do, there's very space for change.
Mustafa, what is your opinion on that question?
Well, I don't think much will change because already it's been a challenge to get the appropriate design for social housing. And again, focusing on this side of Africa, I have two challenges on social houses because families at that level are normally bigger than that of the upper class. So whilst one would think that, you know, social and affordable housing should be smaller in size, at times they just don't fit there. That's the reality. So I don't think COVID will make any difference because there's already a challenge in trying to design houses that will be adaptable to the lower end of society. But let me also, Davina, bring in something that seems to work here in addressing housing. Housing in this part of the world is not only the brick and mortar and the structure itself, because one of the major problems we have is access to land. So what has worked for us is to go on site health services. And that is appealing at times to this class of society that we're trying to address. So you can imagine that once they have access to a serviced and properly planned, parcel of land, they would rather have their houses built traditionally, meaning building it for themselves over a certain period of time. And again, I think this is at times more affordable to them than us building their houses.
That's a very good point. Mukhtar, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's the effect, in my view, will be majorly in terms of the cost of what you may call livability within an estate, which is to say facilities management. I think there's definitely going to be a lasting impact in terms of how much it's going to cost in maintaining a development as a result of this. Because what will happen, right? You will have residents who aren't going to accept anything less. They're going to insist that for the next foreseeable future, we don't know how long, there are gates before someone comes in. There has to be the standard COVID-19 health measures. A person needs to have a mask. The person needs to have, means of sanitizing themselves and a couple of other things. They will probably insist that there is more frequent sanitizing of living spaces, communal living spaces, and so on. They may insist on disinfecting living spaces, which wasn't the case before. Right, which wasn't the case before. So I think in terms of livability and the recurring cost maintaining, neighborhood residences, I think that will rise. In terms of construction, I don't think there'll be much of an effect. Well, there is, as I mentioned, in terms of materials for some price products, sure. But and in terms of design, I think there's a thing to point out. By typically, the sensitivity of, I would say, the Nigerian buyer, and by extension, perhaps, other African countries, you don't find residential designs employing like an open plan type of approach. There's a lot more sort of walls in between spaces, and I think these are natural barriers as far as the containing viruses and so on. So it may not have much of an effect in terms of design. I think it's more towards the livability of an estate, the amount that is going to cost residents to maintain their estates.
Yeah.
And
I assume that though will probably only be likely in sort of upper income markets. Is that correct?
I would say across the board, this is going to happen. At least speaking from our perspective, because the lower priced house in urban shelter, which is maybe for a 1-bedroom unit, or rather for a studio unit, is about 5 million naira. So that's maybe about $12,000 or so dollars. So it's still we're definitely going to be higher, in terms of our price than Miller Fuller, Mr. Sam, for instance. But even for those types of houses, I do foresee that the person buying that is going to insist on certain minimums as far as providing health and safety when they come to live in the estate. The difference is the amount. So if, for instance, in the high-priced, products, the cost of your facility management rise 20% or 30% as a result of this on the long term, or in the medium and long term. Perhaps on those, it might be a 10% increase, but an increase nonetheless. So I think it's just the proclivity of buyers towards this aspect, health and safety, is going to change. People are going to insist and demand more, and they're going to get it.
Yeah, I know that that's being discussed very heavily in markets like the UK or the US. So it's fascinating to see that you are predicting that for your markets as well. I want to be mindful of the time. The webinar is officially ended. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to just have any closing words, any other points you want to make, or things we didn't talk about that you think are really important. Since we seem to be starting with Sam, I'll hand the mic back to you, Sam. Do you have any closing remarks?
Okay, right. One of the questions that was asked earlier, I think, was, is there silver lining to affordable housing development, all of this? And I think certainly, I think there is a lot of good that can come out of this. What we're seeing is that the provision of affordable housing itself protects against this in future pandemics. And it's vital to the people who are most vulnerable to global shocks like COVID-19. Housing is healthcare. Housing is healthcare, and the need is great, very great. The World Bank anticipates that about 49 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty this year, just as a result of the pandemic. And 23 million of those are going to be coming from Africa. So, there's a lot of work to be done. Our UK partner, Real, estimates that building housing at scale represents an untapped £14 million marketplace. So there's a huge opportunity for investment despite the pandemic. And I think this is opportunities are opening, doors are opening for many countries, for investors generally. I think in the long term, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of opportunity in this sector of the economy.
Thank you. Mustafa, do you have anything you'd like to say? Closing
yes, there's a question that comes from Abibola asking how much do I think the cost of project might be affected positively, that's reduced by mass manufacturing or fabrication of building blocks on site. I think if you do mass and it's mechanical, big time, I think you can cut costs probably between 10 and 20%. So that's my answer to that. And final word is that the issue of supply of affordable housing, affordable and social housing, is that it's a huge challenge, but every challenge comes in as an opportunity. So therefore, I think those of us in the business should be active in finding solutions on how to make affordable and social housing more affordable and accessible.
Thank you. Mukhtar?
Just to, I think in the same vein as my colleagues here. For one, I think that definitely this is a difficult time and we recognize it, but it is hopefully an ephemeral thing. And I think the topic for today's discussion was that times, no matter how difficult, will pass. So as a matter of hope, I think that is how we should look at it, as a difficult time, and that that hopefully we hope that it passes sooner rather than later. That's one. Secondly, I think some of the most resilient people are definitely people who reside in this continent. We've been through a lot. We're going through a lot, and I think that COVID, while it hit hard, we'll find a way to emerge better from it. That's number two. I do see a bright future for housing and affordable housing. I think that it's definitely directly correlated to individual income, which we'll have to plan on growing over time. And a lot of these things will fall into place. I think the financial infrastructure to deliver mortgages, by and large, is in place. And as we continue to improve our incomes over time, I think we'll have more and more people being able to afford houses. So in summary, we are optimistic about the future. We recognize what has happened. But like I said, if you're in a business where it takes you 2 years or more to make your product, you have to be optimistic because a lot happens in the span of 2 years. So I think that the future still remains bright, and we're going to emerge better from all of this.
Thank you. Yeah, that does seem to be a common theme amongst the three of you, which is wonderful, very hopeful, and I wish all of you the best in your projects. It sounds
Thank
like
you very much.
everyone is taking an optimistic but also wait and see approach, which is very reasonable and sensible given the environment. I think we had a great conversation. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Mukhtar. Thanks, Mustafa. And I'll hand the reins over to GBB, to Anu. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all once again for being a part of this, both the panelists and the participants. We've had like endless number of questions coming in, which I've made a note of, and we will be taking these questions offline due to the time constraint here. We will also be posting the recorded version on our YouTube page, and the live version is already there on our Facebook page. Thank you all once again for being here, and we hope to see more of this in future. We have the next one planned out for 8th of July, which will be talking about banking finance in particular for affordable housing. So anyone interested can continue to follow us and register yourself to attend more of these sessions. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having
Bye.
me, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.